In early January, the Trump administration took steps to freeze federal support for child care subsidies and other social services spending to 5 Democratic-controlled states, including New York. And while the court system has held the federal action at bay, at least for now, we wanted to explore what the potential changes and current ambiguity mean for emergency homeless and domestic violence shelters in the Empire State that benefit from money out of Washington, D.C. And to do that, we're joined on the Capitol Press Room by Michael Polenberg, a vice president of Safe Horizon, a nonprofit that provides services for crime victims, including from domestic violence. Welcome back to the show, Michael.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
So included in the money that was put on hold by the Trump administration is what's known as the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program, known as TANF, which is supposed to make its way to organizations like yours to operate shelters. Can you explain the importance of this money to your functions and how it could be or maybe has been disrupted as a result of this ambiguity?
Sure. And I do want to shout out the Attorney General of New York, Letitia James, as well as her colleagues in the other impacted states, because they have, they took action immediately to stop this in court. That is still pending. But if it weren't for their immediate action, we might be in far worse shape than we are now. TANF funding comes from the federal government, and it goes to states like New York for a variety of different purposes to help primarily low-income residents. In New York State, TANF is used, amongst other purposes, to fund the network of domestic violence shelters all across the state of New York, from New York City to Buffalo. TANF isn't the only source of federal funding that's used, but it's the primary source of federal funding that's used. So when we all woke up and saw the news that the president was going to freeze TANF funding to New York and to several other states, there was widespread panic because this is, again, the primary source of funding for domestic violence shelters. If we don't have funding for these shelters, then people who are fleeing violence, who are fleeing abuse, who are leaving often in the middle of the night with their children to enter a shelter would have no place to go. So it's a very serious situation. And again, we're deeply grateful to the Attorney General of New York and to her colleagues for really stepping up and taking such immediate action.
Well, what's the scope of this potential action by the federal government? I mean, how many families are we talking about who could potentially have their lives disrupted by this?
It's thousands of families, thousands and thousands of families in domestic violence shelters all across the state of New York, urban areas, rural areas, people who have 1 kid, people who have 3 kids, people who left for a variety of reasons, but primarily because the place they were living was no longer safe. And the president talks about wanting to take our streets back and create, address public safety needs. You're not addressing public safety if you're throwing individuals and families out onto the street and oftentimes leaving them with little choice but to go back to the abuser, to go back to a situation where they could be assaulted, where they could be killed, where their children could be killed. This is not anyone's definition of public safety.
And that scenario that you just outlined, how fast would something like that end up happening with New York's homeless and domestic violence shelters if the Trump administration was successful in pausing or stopping this money? Is this something where you would see changes overnight, or is there the ability of the state to come in and backfill this money or turn to private donors? I mean, what does a world without this federal support look like?
It's too, first of all, I don't think private donors are going to be able to pick up the cost of this, although we certainly could use any support we can get. This is close to $90 million between TANF and another source of federal funding that goes to support some of what happens in domestic violence shelters. We know the governor of New York in the past, Governor Hochul, has stepped up when there was a decrease in federal VOCA funding, which is Victims of Crime Act funding to New York and to other states. Governor Hochul did the right thing and immediately allocated $100 million in the budget to keep crime victim services whole and to make sure that they were available for anyone fleeing violence. Other states, it should be noted, sometimes took different tacks. There were states that said, well, we lost our federal VOCA funding, that's it, and programs closed. To her credit, Governor Hochul didn't do that. Whether or not the state has the ability to backfill all of the lost TANF funding, I don't know. I think it is, what we would prefer to see is this federal funding stream continue. It should just be noted that there's no reason to cut the funding like there's been misuse, there's been fraud.
Let's talk about that. The rationale from the Trump administration, which is a little muddled, is that they have, quote unquote, reason to believe states were granting benefits to people in the country illegally. So two parts to that. One, is there reason to believe that the homeless shelters or domestic violence shelters that you operate are serving that population? And two, if that is the case, is that a problem? Is that a violation of the terms of utilizing those federal dollars?
TANF does not pay for somebody who's undocumented, full stop. So if there's somebody who's undocumented in a shelter, that shelter provider is not getting reimbursed by TANF for that person's stay in shelter. So no, there's not misuse of this funding. Certainly, this took us all by surprise. It's not like there's been some brewing scandal.
But if you are serving undocumented New Yorkers and that facility is getting federal dollars, even if you're not necessarily earmarking that money for that person, couldn't a case be made to say, well, it's all going into the same pot, so ultimately that person is still benefiting?
We are not going to deny shelter to somebody who is fleeing domestic violence and needs a place to sleep and needs a place to heal and needs a place to recover. That would be unconscionable. That would, go against everything that we stand for as an organization. So we, take the safety needs of people in danger seriously. We want to be there for them in any way that we can. That's who we are. That's what we do.
So this is money that was previously allocated. You were anticipating this. And as we've seen in past efforts by the Trump administration to stop money that Congress has already said, yep, we'd like to spend this, they've been unsuccessful in a lot of those efforts. But moving forward, are you worried about the Trump administration working with their allies in Congress to impact TANF funding from the start? They may learn from this experience and say, okay, well, we can't stop the money once it's out of the barn, so to speak, but let's light the barn on fire next time around.
We are always worried about what this administration is going to do, particularly as it impacts the least fortunate among us. For now, our focus is on running the programs that we know how to run, helping to ensure that New Yorkers have a place to go if they feel unsafe. And I would lose too much sleep if I thought about all of the nefarious things that this White House could think of or might think of to impact domestic violence survivors and anybody else impacted by crime.
Well, we're talking just about your effort to maintain the status quo. So when we talk about that, should we think of that as meeting all the needs of New Yorkers who might be unhoused or the victims of domestic violence? Or should the conversation from your perspective really be about how do we increase funding for these services?
Roughly 90% of the funding that New York State spends on domestic violence services comes from the federal government in one form or another. This is an opportunity, I think, for the state to think about, are there programs that the state should invest more state dollars in, both as a principle of commitment to the cause, but also to hedge against potential federal cuts. So I think this is an opportunity to take a clean look at what the landscape is, what services people are receiving, what services people have not yet received, or that there are programs that are struggling that could use additional funding, and take a sober look at the whole situation.
And from a state perspective, as it pertains to increasing the capacity of New York's homeless shelters and shelters serving domestic violence victims, what are you looking for? Is it about capital needs? Is it about operating dollars? What's the best way for state policymakers to expand the capacity of Safe Horizon and other nonprofits in this space?
I think that there needs to be a real investment in community-based services. So often when people think about someone who's been impacted by crime, they think, well, did the police respond? Was the prosecutor able to bring charges? Was the person who committed the crime incarcerated? And if the answer to all those questions is yes, then they kind of wipe their hands and think that the issue has been solved. And that is one part of what crime victims may be seeking. But we know there are many crime victims who never report to the police, where even if they do, a case may not move forward in criminal court. Even if a case moves forward, there might be a sentence which doesn't actually include jail time. So we want to make sure that no matter where people turn to for help, whether they call the police or whether they never call the police, that there is a robust system of care that's available for them, whether they're here born in this country or whether they have just come to the country a few days ago, however they identify. We want to make sure that anyone who needs safety can find it as quickly as they can.
Well, we've been speaking with Michael Polenberg. He is a vice president with Safe Horizon, a nonprofit serving crime victims, including from domestic violence. Michael, thanks for visiting us in the studio. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, David.
If you're enjoying the Capitol Press Room, please consider making a recurring contribution to help make our journalism possible. To show your support, visit capitolpressroom.org/donate.